The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all that they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. By this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. "This is a remote place," they said, "and it's already very late. Send the people away so they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered, "You give them something to eat." They said to him, "That would take 8 months of a man's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat? How many loaves do you have?" he asked. "Go and see." When they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to set before the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of the men who had eaten was 5,000.
Well, hello, friends. It's great to be with you again. Today we're going to be looking at an iconic story, a very memorable story. And if you've been around the church for any period of time, you've probably heard the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000. But before we kind of pass this story off as one that we know, I think we need to take a closer look at it, because the story that Jesus is telling this morning is pointing to a greater purpose. That there is a theme that kind of underlies the story that we need to grab hold of today. And that theme is that Jesus is the God of renewal, that he is the God of revelation, and that he is the God that lovingly reminds people of their need for him. So Jesus renews, he reveals, and he reminds. And so the apostles have just returned from being sent out by Jesus. And when they're sent out, they were given the authority by Jesus to cast out demons, to heal the sick, to share about the King of heaven and how he has come to earth to seek and to save the lost. And in verse 30, which is where we pick up the story this morning, they're meeting back up with Jesus. And Jesus, knowing exactly what they need after a long missionary journey, says, you guys need a time of renewal. You need some rest and some relaxation. You need to be able to repair your bodies a little bit. So he says, let's get in the boat and let's go across out into the wilderness so that we can rest. And as they're getting in the boat, some people see them and they're like, hey, that's Jesus and the disciples. And so they want to see what Jesus and the disciples are up to, and they begin to follow them. They're actually running around the lake, and they meet Jesus and the disciples as they pull their boat up onto the shore. And you can almost imagine what the disciples' reaction would be. Like, they've just come off this long missionary journey. They just want some rest. They just want some good food. They just want to be able to talk to Jesus about what they've been experiencing and what's been happening, to share some stories with him. And I don't know about you, but if I would have been in that situation, my reaction may not have been the best. Like, it would have probably been like, are you kidding me? Like, can y'all just come back tomorrow, or can you do something else for a couple hours and let us at least get some food in our bodies so that we can have the energy to speak and to love you like we want to be able to speak and to love you? But that's not Jesus' response. You look at verse 34. When Jesus went ashore, he saw a large crowd, and he felt compassion for them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. and he began to teach them many things. And why is Jesus doing this? Because Jesus wants to provide an eternal renewal, not just a temporal one. So Jesus saying that these people are like sheep without a shepherd is a renewal statement. It's a powerful statement. It's Jesus beginning to talk about the purpose and the mission that he has here on this earth. And all throughout the Bible, this idea of a shepherd is used synonymously with leaders or synonymously with leadership. So Jesus has compassion on these people because he looks up on the hillside and he sees them and he says, these people, they have no leader. They have no one that is looking out for them or caring for them. They have no one that is loving on them because all the shepherds are gone. All the leaders are gone. And so oftentimes I think when we think about shepherds and sheep, especially in the biblical context, we think of verses out of the Psalms, like Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd and he makes me lie down in green pastures. And so we think of this kind of very pastoral, this very like loving and caring and tender role and relationship. But what Jesus is actually quoting here when he says they're like sheep without a shepherd is Moses. And it's Moses' prayer to God in Numbers 27, right before Moses is going to pass away. He's pleading with God and he's saying, God, you need to give them a leader. You need to give them a shepherd. You need to give them someone to fight for them, to protect them, to keep them from danger, and to lead them to safety. And so in reality, most of the language surrounding this idea of a shepherd in the Old Testament is leading and dealing with a military and political leader for the nation of Israel. And so when the disciples and Jesus look out and they see the people coming towards them, and Jesus calls them sheep without a shepherd, this is actually what he's getting at. That the people want him to be their leader. That the people want him to lead them away from oppression. And so Jesus, when they get there, he sits them down and he begins to speak to them. He begins to teach them about the kingdom of heaven and the gospel message. And so when we see the role of a shepherd in this context, it begins to allow us to kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together. We begin to see this idea of renewal, that Jesus is not simply coming to just feed 5,000 people. He's coming to renew the earth. Because as Ben talked about last week with the story of Herod and his wife and his niece, and somehow John the Baptist ends up being beheaded, which is just a messed up story in and of itself. We get a taste of how a leader that is seeking power will cause destruction and death to achieve their goals. That they begin to see people as objects, things to be consumed, as means to an end, rather than inherently valuable because of who they've been created by. And so if you're following along in chapter 6, it's like the apostles went out, and then there's this random story about Herod and John the Baptist being beheaded, and then at the end, it says the apostles returned to share with Jesus all that had happened. And you're like, what in the world? Like, I don't know if you saw that last week. It's like, where did this story come from? And so what Mark is doing is he's taking a previous moment in time. He's taking a story that's already happened, and he's inserting it into the text. And so what most people believe is he's taking that and he's inserting it there to put it in direct opposition to the type of leadership that Jesus is bringing about in this renewal. Because Jesus is a king that comes to spread love and life and light, not to cause death or destruction, but rather to come as a shepherd who will uphold the value and sanctity of life. And he's come to lead a revolution that leads to renewal and that brings pieces of heaven to earth. And so the people that are listening to Jesus that day on the hillside, they hear this and they understand it, and they try to take Jesus and make him their king. They try to take him by force. But watch what Jesus does. This comes actually out of the Gospel of John chapter 6, verse 15. Perceiving then that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. And so the people are like, all right, here we go. Like, here's our king. He's come. Like, you get the swords, I'll get the shields. You grab the fire, and we're going to go take down Herod. All right, and Jesus is like, oh, hold up. Pump the brakes a little bit, guys. Like, that's not what I'm about. That's not what I'm here to do. My kingdom isn't here to take down power with violence and malice. My kingdom has come to be life and light. And so Jesus says, I'm a whole different kind of king. A king who comes to renew nature and humanity from its bent towards death and destruction and to restore it back to the way that it was created. And so Jesus is so outside the concept of any human leader in that time and any human leader that we have today who says, I'll go for mine. I'll do what makes me feel comfortable. I'll do what gets me more power, what makes me more popular. And so Jesus says, I'm breaking that system down, and I'm creating one where you see the welfare of others as greater than yourself, where you give your resources and your energy and your time to others, because in giving of those resources will never be exhausted, because the Lord will continue to supply you with more. Christian leadership is not identified by titles and position, but by your labor, your love, and how you serve other people. So Jesus says, I have come to renew and redeem life as you know it. And that's the kingdom that I'm part of. So Jesus is talking about this renewal. He's ushering in a new way of thinking and leading. And then he begins to reveal how he's going to do it. And he's going to use the disciples to help usher in, to bring heaven to earth. Because if we can kind of see past this idea of multiplying the bread and multiplying the fish, and we see what really Jesus is doing, we recognize that these miracles that he's doing don't terminate on themselves. In fact, they actually point to something greater. And that something greater is that Jesus is going to reveal that he uses the disciples to usher in his kingdom. And so let me show you what I mean. As you read through the book of Mark, you see Jesus come to these young men. And they're out cleaning their nets and fixing their boats and being fishermen. And so Jesus comes up and he says, hey, I want to make you fishers of men. And it's a weird way, but they're like, yeah, sure, we'll go. And so they follow Jesus. And then for the next several chapters, it's Jesus doing and Jesus teaching and Jesus showing them how to do ministry and how to love people, how to heal the sick, how to cast out demons, how to spread the gospel message. And so Jesus begins over the next couple of chapters just to put on this clinic. And he proves to be the best teacher around as he talks about the kingdom. And then after a while, Jesus says, you know what? I'm a big believer in experience. You kind of got to get your hands dirty, that you got to be able to get in the middle of the action to be able to understand how this truly works. And so Jesus says, you know what? I'm going to give you my power. And he instructs the disciples, and he says, I want you to go out and I want you to fish for men. I want you to preach. I want you to go and to spread the gospel. And you can almost just imagine them being like, so what do we preach? And Jesus is just going, well, I got a couple of good sermons. You could borrow those. I don't mind. Well, what do we do? Well, just do all that I've shown you to do. And so the disciples, they do this, and the power of God goes with them, and they experience success, and it goes well, and it works. And so now they're standing at the bottom of the hill. And most historians believe that there was 5,000 men there, but there could have been up to about 12,000 women and children accompanying them. And so they look up the hill and they see all of these people, and they begin to have compassion for these people, that they want to help them, that they want to be able to serve them. And they're faced with a challenge. They're faced with a real life situation where there is no possible way for them to be able to meet the needs of the people that are in front of them. And so Jesus, in this moment, is helping the disciples understand that they have left the king of the universe out of the equation. That while they were on their missionary journeys, that it was the power of Christ that indwelled them, that allowed them to have success. And so Jesus is teaching the disciples that they need to realize that what they may lack in physical resources, that Jesus has in infinite and inexhaustible stockpiles. And so are we not like that? How quickly do we forget God's past provision when faced with a new crisis? Our faith for the new trials we will face in the future remains sturdy if we deliberately remember God's provision in the past. The disciples needed to learn, just as we need to learn, that Jesus, as he reveals to them his plan for renewal, is calling them to a place where we will struggle if we focus on what we have opposed as to what God has called us to do. As Mark tells us, it's starting to get late in the day, and the disciples, wanting to care for the people as Jesus has taught them to do, come up to Jesus and they're like, hey, we need to send the people away so they can go in town and be able to buy some food. And Jesus responds and he just says, no. Why don't you guys figure out how you're going to feed them? I'll keep on teaching. And you guys figure out how to feed them. And you can almost imagine the disciples be like, who? Like us? Like you want us to feed all of these people? And Philip responds almost sarcastically, probably the most sarcastically that we ever see the disciples respond or talk to Jesus. And he says, Jesus, not even 200 denarii, not even almost a full year's wage will be able to fill and to feed all of these people. And Jesus, that's crazy. There's no way that we can do that. And so Jesus says, okay, well, if we don't have the money, then why don't you guys go out and ask the people if they have any food that they can share? And so the disciples go out and they find 5 small loaves of bread and 2 little tiny dried fish. And they bring those back to Jesus. And so I think that Jesus in this moment is letting them feel their inadequacy to solve the problem. He's teaching them to rely on his sufficiency and not their competence, not their ability to be able to solve the problem. And so have you ever been there? I certainly have. Tim Keller says that when it comes to doing ministry, that only when you realize you're inadequate do you become adequate for ministry. And so the beauty of the kingdom that Jesus is revealing in this moment is not based on anything that we can possess or a certain skill that we have to master. It does not require us getting everything figured out before we act. This is because Jesus is the one that supplies what we need. So Micah 6:8 has become super popular as a verse in the last couple of days, but I absolutely love what he's talking about because it points to exactly what we're talking about this morning. He said, he has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. He doesn't ask you to go out and do it. He just asks you to trust and to allow you to see that he will work through you as you humbly walk with him. And so Jesus talks about renewal. Then he reveals his plan to bring the gospel to the people. And then finally, he's going to remind us and remind the disciples of something that's very important this morning. He reminds us of our purpose. And he reminds the disciples of their purpose, that he's going to partner with them to take care of the physical and spiritual needs of the people. And what I think is beautiful about this is that Jesus, each time that he distributes the food, that each time that the disciples bring an empty basket back to him, that there's that intentional movement towards Jesus to allow him to give them exactly what they need to be able to serve those people. They have to remain utterly dependent on the Lord for everything that they need. Now let's put that into our context. As believers, we are the ones that are responsible for speaking the gospel message. We are the ones responsible for carrying the baskets to the people. And right now, there are a ton of questions that we don't have answers to. And practically speaking, there is no human being on the face of the planet that can understand the complex nature of all that we have going on, whether it be a global health pandemic, an economic recession, or the racial tensions that have reached their boiling over point. But we do know that the God that we serve has the answers and the wisdom that we need to love well those around us in and through these troubling times. As believers, part of wisdom is knowing where to go when you don't have the answers. And so what's amazing about the reminder that Jesus is giving us is that it invites us into the story. As believers, that we have the opportunity, and along with a biblical command, to pick up our basket and to act. The beautiful thing about having to bring our empty basket back to the Father each time, to bring back an empty basket means that we can seek His wisdom, that we can seek His answers and solutions for the problems that we are facing. And so what would our churches, our homes, our communities look like that if each time our basket was empty, that we would run back to the Father, coming to Him with humility and seeking to do what's best for others and not just ourselves. And then taking our basket now full of the strength and the wisdom of God and acting and speaking truth into a world that desperately needs to hear that there is a God in heaven that loves them, that cares for them, that desires to have a relationship with them. And that as believers, as followers of this God that desires to care and love for them, that we have those same desires as well. That we want to walk with them. But all of this starts by examining our own heart. As we come to the Lord, we're seeking wisdom. But not only do we seek wisdom, we receive a heart transformation. We have the opportunity to do as David did in Psalm 139, and to ask the Lord, as he says, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my concerns. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." To have God identify the places in your heart that need to be worked on, where sin patterns and destructive habits and ways of thinking can be removed. And it's been something that I've wrestled with this week as I've began to identify and be faced with even some of my own prejudicial thoughts and ideas towards others. And this is the hard part. This is the part where we have to take an honest inventory to allow the Lord, through His wisdom, to transform our minds, the way we think, the way we act, the way that we talk. And so the beautiful thing about a relationship that we have with our Heavenly Father is that it's just like the disciples, that He calls us to act, that He calls us to serve and to love those that we are in relationship with. He calls us to get outside of our comfort zone, to take the wisdom that we have received and not only call ourselves Christians, but to act like one as well, to speak truth about the value and the sanctity of all human life, regardless of color, to denounce and to stand against injustices that we see, to proactively seek conversations with people that are different than us, to understand how to better love and to serve our brothers and sisters, to see what life looks like from their perspective, and then to seek justice with them. All of these actions help us recognize the love that has been given to us by our Heavenly Father. By recognizing and understanding that type of deep love, it moves us from shame and guilt and fear to freedom. Wisdom from the Lord helps us to see clearly how to bring the flourishing of humanity that God desires. The wisdom of the world, however, is detrimental to this flourishing. It's detrimental to humanity and what God desires for humanity. James, in his book, summarizes well the two types of wisdom. Who among you is wise and understanding? Let him show by his good behavior his deeds in the gentleness of wisdom. But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your heart, do not be arrogant and so lie against the truth. This wisdom is not that which comes down from above, but is earthly, natural, demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there is disorder and every evil thing. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, reasonable, full of mercy and good fruits, unwavering without hypocrisy. And the seed whose fruit is righteous is sown in peace by those who make peace. And so the wisdom So then wisdom is running to Jesus when you don't have the answers. And Jesus is reminding us today that the answer that we need and the peace that we seek comes from a daily dependence on the Lord, seeking first his kingdom and his righteousness, asking him to reveal his wisdom to you and how to think and how to act and how to engage the world. And so as you bring your basket to him, he is reminding you to surrender your gifts, to surrender your life, to surrender your resources, and to put them into the hands of Jesus. And to say, today, Lord, here I am. Use me. And then the next day, to do the exact same thing. To say, Lord, here's my gifts, here's my resources, here's my entire life. Use me for your glory. And don't underestimate what God will do with that. Don't underestimate what God will do with a surrendered heart, because the reality is that we all want to make a difference. We all want to be part of changing the world for good. But it starts with daily seeking a relationship with the one who created the world. It's with this mindset that we begin to use what God gives us through our daily time with him, that we can truly live in the way that he has called us to live. That we can be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. As believers, we need to gain ground in this area. We need to be salt and light. We need to be a safe space and place for people of every ethnicity to gather and to have conversations that seek reconciliation, that seek to make the glory of God known here on the earth. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a pastor living in Nazi Germany during the Holocaust, a time of systematic racism and genocide, provides us this reminder. He says, silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak, and not to act is to act. Another way of saying that, I believe, is that inaction is always an action. That inaction is always an action. So if I can encourage you to do one thing, if I can encourage you to act in one way this week, it would be to daily throw yourself at the feet of Jesus and to allow his wisdom and patience and peace to inform you on how to listen well, how to speak kindly, and how to love fully. And so the feeding of the 5,000 is not just a story about Jesus feeding some people on a hillside. It's a story of how Jesus has come to renew the earth, to fix the souls of every human being, as he reveals to us his plan and how he uses humanity as agents of reconciliation, as agents of change, as heralds of the gospel. And then he reminds us that when life gets tough, that we can run to him, to have our baskets filled with his wisdom, to have our wounds bound, to have our hearts healed, as he fills us with the wisdom and grace to interact with the world. I love you guys. I hope you have a great week, and I hope you have a great week of worship. We'll see you later.
I've carried a burden for too long on my wasn't created to bear it alone. I hear your invitation to let it all go. I see it now, I'm laying it down, and I know that run to the Father, I fall into grace. I'm done with the hiding, no reason to wait. My heart needs a surgeon, my soul needs a friend. So I'll run to the Father again and again and again and again. Oh, oh. Saw my condition your Son for redemption, the price for my heart. And I don't have a contest with that kind of love. I don't understand, I can't comprehend. All I know is I need you. I run to the Father, I fall into grace. I'm done with the hiding, no reason to wait. My heart needs a surgeon, my soul needs a friend. So I run to the Father again and again and again and again. Oh, oh, again and again and again and again. Oh, 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 my heart has been in your sight long before my first breath. Running into your arms is running to life from death. I feel this rush deep in my chest. Your mercy is calling out. Just as I am, you pull me in, and I know I need I run to the Father, I fall into grace. I'm done with the hiding, no reason to wait. My heart needs a surgeon, my soul needs a friend. So I run to the Father again and again. I run to the Father, I fall into grace. I'm done with the hiding, no reason to wait. My heart found a surgeon, my soul found a friend. So I run